By the start of the 1880s, the Royal Navy had built a series of ironclad battleships, starting with HMS Inflexible, all of which had their main armament set amidships in N-echelon turrets, as this seemed to be pretty much the only way to field the increasingly large and heavy guns that appeared to be required in naval combat on something that approached a vaguely economical hull. However, they were concerned that the French had built a series of, well, for the time at least, were relatively swift barbette ships with heavy guns and reasonable armour. And while she dropped conventional armour almost entirely, the Italian battleship Italia and her sister ship Lepanto were both fast and carried the heaviest guns afloat. A single battleship, armed with a pair of twin 12-inch armed barbettes, one at each end, had been laid down in 1880 and named HMS Collingwood. But only she and Inflexible were thought to be true matches for this series of potential foreign threats. So, to match said foreign threats, a new design was sought, which would combine the Royal Navy's somewhat late move to breech-loading guns with a greater use of compound armour than seen in previous vessels, as well as new machinery to hopefully give the new ships powerful guns, high top speed, and good protection. 4 designs were offered. Design A was capable of 18 knots with a pair of 12-inch twin barbettes, one at each end, and a pair of single 16-inch guns in a ovoid barbette amidships, one gun on each side. The sacrifice here was that its only armour was a protected deck, a little bit like Italia. Design B reversed the armament with single 16-inch guns at each end and a pair of 12-inch guns on each wing, along with having basic citadel armour, all at the cost of reducing speed to about 14.5 knots. Design C was basically a slightly faster version of Inflexible with compound armour, with 4 16-inch guns in a pair of turrets and echelon amidships. Design D advanced the design of the ironclad HMS Dreadnought, which had a pair of twin turrets, one at each end, only now with 16-inch guns instead of 12-inch, and an armoured citadel. This design would have a speed of 15 knots. Although of the same calibre as the 16-inch guns that could be found on Inflexible, the new guns being considered had longer barrels and thus hit harder. The single 16-inch options could be replaced directly with twin 12-inch, or you could replace twin 12-inch on the various designs with single 16s. However, concerns over the open nature of barbettes meant that Design D was selected to proceed, but using twin 13.5-inch turrets, with a speed specification of 14 knots and 20 inches of compound armour. Various iterations on this basic design were now considered, and these varied wildly, including one for a ship of 16 knots with 16-inch twin turrets and 25 inches of compound armour. However, the costs for these options were understandably seen as just a little too high, and soon the idea reverted to repeating Collingwood, only with either twin 12-inch or single 16-inch turrets instead of the barbettes, or potentially one of each with the 16-inch gun forward and the twin 12-inch aft. Armour layout and machinery would also be slightly improved. But then minds changed yet again, and finally 2 ships were ordered, now with a main armament of 13.5-inch guns, back in twin barbettes, after all that talk of turrets, one fore and one aft. These would be named Rodney and Howe. Secondary and anti-torpedo boat batteries consisted of a dozen 6-pounders and 10 3-pounders, plus a number of above-water single 14-inch torpedo tubes. The belt had a maximum thickness of 18 inches of compound armour, the barbettes were 11.5 inches thick, and the deck was up to 3 inches thick. Around 10,000 indicated horsepower gave a top speed of 16 knots via 2 screws, with another 1 to 1.5 knots possible if you wanted to go under forced draft. Displacement came in at just a fraction over 10,000 tons normal. 2 further ships, Anson and Camperdown, were ordered the next financial year, followed by a final ship, Benbow, which had a different main battery, and that meant that what is loosely termed the Admiral class of ironclads had 3 different main batteries when you include Collingwood in the collection, and all the ships had slightly different lengths, engine powers, top speeds, and armour layouts depending on their main batteries. I'll talk about Collingwood and Benbow in their own separate videos, but for the core group, you might call them the Rodney subclass, all had similar careers, taking quite considerable time to commission after technically otherwise being completed, largely because they were waiting for the main guns to be finished and installed. Entering service fully in 1888 for Rodney and 1889 for the other three, they were generally assigned to the Channel or home fleets for a short period of time before being sent to the Mediterranean over the course of the early 1890s, where Howe managed to go aground, requiring extensive repairs, and Camperdown famously managed to sink the Mediterranean fleet's brand new flagship, HMS Victoria. But by the late 1890s, despite less than 10 years of active service, they'd already been largely rendered obsolete by the rise of the pre-dreadnought, and gradually they filtered back to the UK, where they served as guard ships in various ports before being sent into the reserves to free up their crews for more modern battleships. Rodney and Anson would thus be sold for scrapping in 1909, Howe followed in 1910, and Camperdown in 1911, partially because she'd spent her last 3 years being somewhat useful as a depot ship for submarines.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.